They didn't just leave her to die, they watched. From a climate-controlled room in Arlington, Virginia, 3 men sat in front of a satellite terminal and tracked the wreckage in real time. The feed was crisp, high resolution, the kind of imagery that costs more per hour than most Americans earn in a month. They could see the hull section. They could see the debris field spreading across the surface in the slow, indifferent pattern that cold water makes when it has finished with something. They could see her. One of them leaned back in his chair and said, "Let the Atlantic do the paperwork." Victor Harlan did not laugh. He was not a man who laughed at things like this. He simply looked at the screen for another moment with the particular expression of a man confirming an entry in a ledger, then reached forward and closed the feed. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon from the bottle on the credenza behind him. He handed a glass to the man on his left. He kept one for himself. They believed it was over. They were wrong about everything. The North Atlantic Ocean in January does not forgive. That is not poetry. That is physics. That is biology. That is the kind of brutal, indifferent mathematics that survival instructors teach at naval training facilities, so that the men and women who might one day find themselves in that water understand with complete clinical precision exactly what they are facing. Water temperature between 32 and 36 degrees Fahrenheit. Meaningful consciousness. 30 minutes to 90 minutes, depending on body mass conditioning and the particular stubbornness of the individual nervous system. After that, the blood retreats from the extremities. The muscles begin to fail in sequence. The fingers stop responding. The arms follow. The mind begins a long, slow drift toward a place it does not return from. 2 hours, almost certainly fatal. 6 hours, no recorded survivors. 72 hours. There is no protocol for 72 hours. There is no case study. There is no entry in any medical manual that accounts for a human being remaining alive after 3 days of exposure in the winter North Atlantic. The literature simply does not contain that number because that number has never needed to be recorded, which is exactly why Chief Petty Officer Gus Briggs, 18 years in Naval Special Warfare, a man who had pulled bodies and survivors from 3 different oceans and 1 very bad river in a country he still didn't name out loud, in certain company hesitated at the door of the rescue helicopter, not because of the cold, not because of the distance to the water, because of what he was looking at through the open door as the helicopter held at 40 feet above the surface, and because what he was looking at did not make any sense at all. And Gus Briggs was a man who had learned over 18 years to trust the things that didn't make sense, because those were usually the things that got you killed if you ignored them. Commander Elias Thorne was standing behind him, one hand on the frame, looking at the same thing. The woman was on her back on a section of hull maybe 12 feet long, riding the surface at a low angle. Her face was tilted slightly upward. Her skin was the color of old bone. Her hair spread flat against the wreckage beneath her, frozen at the edges where the spray had reached it. Her lips carried the particular grayish blue that every survival medic learns to recognize as a color that means the conversation you are about to have with this person may be the last one they ever have. And in her hands, locked against her chest with both arms wrapped around it in the specific way that a person holds something they have already decided to die protecting, was a rifle. Briggs said, "She's got a weapon." Thorne had already seen it. He looked at it for exactly the amount of time it took him to understand that whatever that rifle was, it was not standard. The barrel configuration was wrong. The stock was wrong in a way he couldn't immediately name, but would spend a long time thinking about afterward. The scope mounting suggested someone had made very specific decisions about very specific requirements, and those decisions had nothing to do with anything Thorne had seen in 19 years of service. "What's the protocol?" Briggs said. It wasn't quite a question. "The protocol," Thorne said, "is you go in and you bring her back. The rifle comes with her." He paused. "Do not attempt to separate them. You understand me?" A beat of silence. "Yes, sir." Briggs went in. He said later in the debrief, sitting in a heated room with a cup of coffee he kept forgetting to drink, that the moment he hit the water was like being hit by the entire ocean at once. Every exposed surface of skin registered the temperature as pain, because the nervous system, which is a very honest instrument, understood immediately that this was not an environment where human beings were designed to function. He reached the wreckage in under 2 minutes. He reached for her. Her eyes opened. Briggs stopped moving. He would describe it carefully later because Briggs was not a man who used language loosely, and he wanted to get it right. He would say that her eyes opened and she looked at him. Not the way someone looks at you when they are confused or hypothermic or surfacing slowly from unconsciousness. She looked at him the way you look at something when you are deciding whether or not it constitutes a threat. He said it took approximately 2 seconds. He said those were 2 of the most uncomfortable seconds of his professional life. "I'm Navy," he said. He said it out loud there in the freezing water, treading in a survival suit while she stared at him from the wreckage. "I'm here to get you out." She did not speak. She looked at him for 1 more second. Then she let him take her. She did not let go of the rifle. He did not try to make her. They got her aboard, and the crew medic, a young petty officer named Harwick, began emergency warming protocols immediately. Mylar blankets, heated oxygen, vital signs that he ran twice because the first set of numbers made him question his equipment. Her core temperature was critically low. Her pulse was steady. Her blood pressure was reduced but present. Her pupils responded to light. She was alive in a way that Harwick could not explain and would not try to explain in the official report because he did not yet have language for what he was looking at. 3 days, he said quietly, almost to himself as he worked. 3 days. Thorne stood at the far wall of the helicopter cabin and watched the woman and the rifle and said nothing. He was doing the thing he did when something required understanding before it required action, which was to look at all the pieces without reaching for any of them yet. The rifle bothered him, not because of what it was, because of what it suggested about the person holding it. He had handled military precision rifles across 2 decades and 3 Allied service branches. He knew the difference between a weapon built for general operational use and a weapon built to achieve something very specific from the beginning. This was the second kind. Every component had the quality of a decision made by someone working from precise mathematical requirements rather than standard procurement specifications. He wanted to know what those requirements were. He also understood that wanting to know right now with a woman who should be dead wrapped in thermal blankets 10 feet away was the wrong priority. "Harwick," he said. "Sir?" "When she's stable, not before." "Understood." Thorne keyed his radio. "Portsmouth, this is Thorne. We have a survivor. Female, no identification. Condition is critical but stable. We have 1 item of interest accompanying the survivor." He paused. "Request medical and security at the landing zone. And get me Pruitt." A crackle. "Commander, did you say no identification?" "That's what I said." A longer pause. "Understood. Pruitt will meet you at the pad. We'll meet." What Thorne did not say, and what he would not say until he had a clearer picture of what he was dealing with, was the order he gave next quietly to Harwick, covering the radio before he spoke. "Nothing in the log about the item of interest, nothing about her condition beyond critical and stable, nothing goes up the chain until I say so." Harwick looked at him. "That's an unusual order, sir. It's an unusual situation." Specialist Court Pruitt was waiting at the landing pad when they touched down, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the medical team move toward the helicopter with the careful expression of a man who processes information quickly and is currently processing the gap between what he expected to see and what he is actually seeing. When they transferred her to the stretcher, he got his first look at the rifle. He didn't say anything for 9 seconds. Thorne counted. "Pruitt." "I'm looking, sir." "What do you see?" Pruitt turned and met his eyes. "I see something that shouldn't exist. And I mean that technically, not as an expression." He looked back at the rifle. "Building this would require access to manufacturing specifications and material tolerances that are not part of any program I have documented knowledge of." Thorne felt the thing he had been trying not to feel since the helicopter, a cold that had nothing to do with the North Atlantic. "Can you get into it?" "I can try." Pruitt looked at the rifle for another moment. "But I want to tell you something first. In my experience, when someone holds a weapon like this with their last available physical strength after 3 days in the ocean, they are not protecting the weapon." He paused. "They're protecting what's inside it." Thorne looked at him. "Inside it. The stock configuration is wrong. There's added density in the base section where there should be none. Either this is custom work by someone who didn't know what they were doing, or there is a secondary compartment built into the frame." He paused again. "Those are not equally likely explanations." "How long do you need?" 6 hours? Maybe 8. You have 4, Thorne said. And Pruitt. No external systems. Nothing networked. No reports going anywhere until I say otherwise. This stays in the room. Pruitt studied him for a moment with the particular look of a man evaluating whether an order is unusual because of the situation or unusual because something is wrong. Yes, sir, he said. The medical team at Portsmouth Naval Medical had treated a great many things. They were not a group that rattled easily. What rattled them about the woman in Bay 4 was not her injuries, which were serious. It was not her vital signs, which remained stubbornly inconsistent with 3 days of ocean exposure at recorded water temperatures. What rattled them was what happened when the nursing staff, with entirely reasonable medical intentions, attempted to remove the rifle from her hands while she was unconscious. She came awake the way a switch is thrown, not gradually, not with the slow, confused surfacing of deep unconsciousness. Completely still one moment, completely present the next. Her hands repositioned on the rifle before her eyes had fully focused, and she said one sentence in a voice that was quiet and destroyed from exposure and absolutely clear. You don't touch that. Dr. Renata Ellsworth, the facility's lead trauma physician, had been at the foot of the bed reviewing the chart. She looked up. The woman was looking directly at her with the kind of focus that takes time to develop and does not come from textbooks. I understand, Dr. Ellsworth said. She used the tone she had spent 20 years in emergency medicine learning to use. The tone that says, I am not your enemy. I am not going to push. No one will touch it. You're safe. A silence. Where am I? Portsmouth Naval Medical, New Hampshire. You were found in the ocean. Something moved across the woman's face. Not relief. Not gratitude. Something more complicated than either. Something that looked to Ellsworth's clinical eye like calculation. How long was I out there? We believe approximately 72 hours. The woman closed her eyes. She was still for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was flat. Then he's dead. Ellsworth waited. I need water, the woman said, and I need the person in charge of my rescue. Only him, no one else. Ellsworth went to find Thorne. He was in the corridor outside, standing with the particular stillness of a man making a list in his head. He received the message and went immediately. He stopped outside the door for a moment, hand on the frame, thinking about what Pruitt had said, about what it means when someone protects something with their last available strength, about what might be inside. Then he pushed the door open. She was sitting up in the bed, which she should not have had the physical capacity to do given what her body had been through. The rifle was leaning against the wall beside her, and she was watching the door with the same quality of attention that Briggs had described. Not aggression, not fear, evaluation. She was younger than he had expected. Mid-30s, dark hair still carrying the damp of the ocean. Eyes that had the specific quality of someone who has spent a very long time observing things and very little time being observed. Commander Thorne, she said. Not a question. That's right. He pulled the chair close to the bed but did not sit immediately. He wanted her to see that he was not positioning himself above her. She noticed. He could tell she noticed. And you're Mara, she said. That's all I'm giving you right now. He sat down. All right. A pause. Outside the institutional sounds of the facility, footsteps, the soft mechanical rhythm of monitoring equipment. The man you sent into the water, she said. Briggs. Yes. He looked at me before he reached for me. She looked at the wall beside her where the rifle rested. Most people reach first and look later. The ones who reach first don't usually last long in situations that require reading people quickly. I'll tell him you said so. Tell him he has good eyes. Another pause. Your weapons specialist, she said. Has he touched the rifle yet? He's been asked to examine it, under controlled conditions. What has he found? I haven't heard yet. She nodded slowly. She looked at the rifle. Then she looked back at him with an expression that was not quite a request, and not quite a demand, and occupied the precise space between them. When he tells you what he finds, I need you to come back here immediately. Don't discuss it with anyone else first. Don't send it up the chain. She held his gaze. Can you promise me that... Thorne looked at her. He thought about the order he had already given Pruitt. Nothing networked, nothing reported. Stays in the room. He thought about the fact that he had given that order before she asked him to, before he had spoken to her at all, before he even knew her name. "I already did," he said. Something shifted in her expression. Barely perceptible, but it shifted. And underneath the flatness and the exhaustion and the calculation, something moved that looked for just a moment like the echo of a person who had not expected that answer. "Why?" she asked. He considered the question honestly. "Because whatever was worth holding on to for 3 days in the Atlantic is worth understanding before the wrong people find out about it." She looked at him for a long moment. The monitoring equipment made its quiet sounds. Somewhere down the corridor, a door opened and closed. "You pulled me out of the ocean, Commander," she said finally. Her voice was quiet, precise, without drama. "I'm going to try very hard to make sure that doesn't get you killed." The door opened. Harwick stood in the frame. His face carried the expression of someone who has received information they are not certain how to deliver to a superior officer without causing alarm while also being unable to suppress the alarm entirely. "Sir," he said, "Pruitt needs you. He says—" A pause. "He says, you need to come right now." Thorne stood. He looked at Mara. She was already looking at the rifle. "Go," she said quietly. He moved toward the door. "Commander." He stopped. She did not look at him when she spoke. Her voice was flat and carrying and held no performance whatsoever. "Whatever number he shows you, whatever distance." A pause. "It's real." Thorne walked out. Behind him, in a room in a naval medical facility on the New Hampshire coast, a woman who had spent 3 days in water that should have killed her leaned her head back against the pillow and breathed slowly and waited for the world to catch up to the truth she had already delivered. In a maintenance room at the back of the facility's secondary wing, a weapons specialist named Court Pruitt had just found something he did not yet have words for. And far to the south, in a climate-controlled office in Arlington, Virginia, a status indicator on a private monitoring system had just changed color. The 48-hour clock had already run out. Thorne moved through the corridor at the controlled pace of a man who has somewhere urgent to be and understands that urgency visibly expressed is information given to observers. He had learned this a long time ago. He applied it now without thinking about it the way a person applies any skill they have practiced long enough that it no longer requires thought. Harwick kept pace beside him and said nothing, which told Thorne more than words would have. The room Pruitt had taken was a maintenance space in the secondary wing. No windows facing the main corridor. One entry point. No network terminals. Exactly as instructed. Thorne noted this and felt something settle slightly in his chest. He pushed the door open. Briggs was there still in partial gear, sitting in a metal chair with his elbows on his knees and his eyes fixed on the table at the center of the room. Alongside him were 2 other members of Thorne's unit. Petty Officer Alden Moore, 11 years in Naval Intelligence Support, currently assigned to the Recovery Division, and Chief Warrant Officer Siegel, 6 years, attached to Special Operations with the quiet, watchful quality of a man who has learned to receive disturbing information without broadcasting his reaction to it. The rifle was on the table. Pruitt was standing beside it, jacket off, sleeves rolled. He had the focused, slightly hollowed look of a man who has been working with extreme concentration for several hours and has just found something that temporarily stopped that concentration entirely. "Close the door," Pruitt said. Thorne closed it. "Tell me." Pruitt put both hands flat on the table. He looked at Thorne the way a person looks at someone when they are choosing the most precise words available, because the imprecise ones will not do justice to what they have discovered. "The weapon itself," he began, "is unlike anything in any catalog I have access to. The barrel is machined to tolerances that are not achievable with standard military manufacturing processes. The scope is a hybrid optical elements from 3 different high-end civilian manufacturers assembled into a configuration that should not work as well as it clearly does. The trigger mechanism is hand-fitted. All of it. Every component." He paused. "This was not built for general use. This was built to achieve one specific thing at a distance no standard platform could reach." "What distance?" Siegel said. Pruitt didn't answer that yet. He reached under the table and brought up a laptop, air-gapped, Thorne noted, not connected to anything, and turned it so the screen faced the room. "The stock," he said. "You were right about the density. There is a secondary compartment built into the base. Composite shell. Self-sealing. Waterproof to approximately 40 meters of depth. Inside is an encrypted data module. Military-grade encryption but non-standard. It took me 3 hours and 20 minutes to crack the outer layer." "The inner layer," Thorne said. "Still working. But the outer partition—" Pruitt stopped. He looked at the screen. He looked at Thorne. "Commander, there are ballistic records in here going back 4 years, shot logs, every engagement, atmospheric data, wind calculations, environmental variables at time of firing, target confirmation codes, mission records." Aldenmore leaned forward. "Confirmation codes from who?" "That is an excellent question I cannot yet answer. The issuing authority is referenced by a designator I don't recognize, but whoever issued these missions had full operational infrastructure, pre-mission intelligence packages, real-time atmospheric support, post-mission confirmation protocols. These are not random engagements." He paused. "These are tasked operations. The room processed this." "How many?" Thorne said. 17 confirmed operations over 4 years. Briggs looked up from his chair. 17. "Yes. And no one found her." "No one was looking," Pruitt said. "Or rather, the people who knew what she was doing believed they controlled her completely. She was their asset. You don't surveil an asset, you direct them." Thorne moved to the table. He looked at the laptop screen. Lines of data, coordinates, numbers. The dry, precise language of ballistic documentation, the vocabulary of mathematics applied to violence because mathematics does not flinch and does not ask whether any of this was right. "Show me the last entry," he said. Pruitt reached over and scrolled. He stopped. Thorne read the screen. He read it once. He read it again because the first reading produced a number that his brain declined to file correctly. He looked up at Pruitt. "Is this accurate?" "I have verified it 4 times." "Then say it out loud." Pruitt straightened. He looked around the room at each of the faces present. Then he looked back at Thorne, and in the steady, measured tone of a man who has already processed his own reaction and is now delivering the information to those who have not yet had that opportunity, he said, 4,112 meters. Nobody spoke. 1 round. Still nothing. 1 confirmed kill. Crosswind approximately 22 kilometers per hour with variable gusts. Elevation differential between shooter position and target was -14 meters. Flight time of the projectile was 6.8 seconds. 6.8 seconds. Thorne thought about what 6.8 seconds meant. He thought about a projectile leaving a barrel and climbing into the sky and beginning its long arc downward toward a target that was at the moment of firing more than 2.5 miles away. He thought about every variable that existed in that interval. Wind direction, temperature gradient, air density at altitude, the rotation of the Earth introducing a drift that required mathematical compensation before the trigger was pulled, the heartbeat of the shooter, the breathing, the absolute stillness required in the body while the mind performed calculations that most ballistic computers struggled to complete in time. 6.8 seconds in the air, 1 round. "The record," Siegel said, quietly. Not a question, a thought spoken aloud. "The documented record is significantly shorter," Pruitt said. "This distance exceeds any confirmed engagement in the historical record by more than 500 meters. Aldenmore stood. He walked to the table and looked at the screen himself, read the numbers, stepped back. "That's not possible," he said. "The data says it happened," Pruitt replied. "Data can be fabricated." "Not this data. The environmental readings cross-reference with meteorological records from the date in question. The atmospheric conditions documented in this log match the actual recorded weather at these coordinates on that specific day. If someone fabricated this, they fabricated it using real historical weather data from 3 days ago." He paused. "Which means they fabricated it in the last 72 hours. Which means—" "It happened 3 days ago," Thorne said. "Yes." Thorne looked at the target designation line on the screen. He looked at it for a moment. "Say that name out loud," he said. Pruitt looked at him, then at the screen, then back. "Victor Harlan," he said. The room went very still. Victor Harlan, whose name appeared in defense contracting circles the way certain mountains appear on maps, massive, permanent, apparently immovable. whose company held classified contracts across 3 government agencies, whose personal network included people whose names appeared on lists that required security clearances to access. Victor Harlan, who had died 3 days ago in what official preliminary reporting had described as a sudden cardiac event pending further investigation. Pending investigation. Thorne straightened. He looked at Pruitt, at Siegel, at Briggs, who had risen from his chair and was standing with the expression of a man who is quietly recalculating everything he thought he understood about the past several hours. "He didn't have a cardiac event," Briggs said. "No," Thorne said. "He didn't." "And the woman we pulled out of the ocean made the shot." "Yes." "And then someone destroyed her vessel." "Within 4 hours of the confirmed kill," Thorne said, "and left her there because they believed the ocean would handle what remained." The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was the kind of silence that occurs when a group of people who are trained to handle difficult information simultaneously understand that the difficult information they are currently handling has implications that extend considerably beyond the walls of the room they are standing in. "Who sent her after Harlan?" Aldemore said. "I don't know yet. The mission authority is still behind the inner encryption layer." "Who wanted her dead after she made the shot?" Thorne paused. "Possibly the same people who sent her. Possibly someone else. Either way, they had the resources to locate her vessel at sea and destroy it within hours of the operation. That is not a small capability." He thought about what she had said. "Whatever number he shows you, whatever distance, it's real." She had known. Before he went to the room, before Pruitt said anything, she had known exactly what would be on that screen. "There's something else," Pruitt said. Thorne turned. Pruitt had that expression again, the one from the landing pad, choosing precise words. "The outer partition is complete. 17 mission records cleanly organized, fully documented. But the encryption architecture tells me something about how this module was constructed." He paused. "The outer partition is not the whole module. There is significantly more space inside, and there is a second encryption layer protecting it that is not the same as the first. The first layer was built by whoever built the outer partition. The second layer—" He stopped. "She built it herself," Thorne said. Pruitt looked at him. "That is my best assessment, yes." "The outer partition is the mission record," Thorne said. "What an organization logs and keeps, but the inner partition is what she was collecting." Pruitt nodded, slowly. "I think so, yes." Thorne's mind was moving fast, organizing information not in sequence but in relationship, understanding how each piece connected to every other piece and what the shape of the whole looked like when you stepped back far enough to see it. A woman selected for extraordinary capability, trained by an organization with operational infrastructure significant enough to support 17 missions over 4 years without detection. 17 missions. Then something changed. She started collecting. She was building a case while still operating within the system that tasked her. "That would require extraordinary discipline," Siegel said, not arguing, acknowledging. "Yes," Thorne said, "it would." He thought about the quality of stillness he had seen in her eyes, not the stillness of shock, not the stillness of damage, the stillness of someone who has made every calculation they need to make and is waiting patiently for the situation to catch up to the mathematics. "Pruitt," he said, "the inner partition, how long to crack it?" "Unknown, could be hours, could be considerably longer, depending on the method she used." He paused. "But, Commander, I think she could open it herself in approximately 30 seconds. "I know," Thorne said. "Get the laptop, you're coming with me." He was halfway to the door when Aldemore spoke. "Sir, if Harlan is the target and the people who sent her also tried to kill her after the shot, then there is an organization out there right now that believes its shooter is dead, its mission is complete, and its secrets are at the bottom of the North Atlantic." Thorne stopped. He looked at the closed door for a moment. "Yes," he said. "How long before they figure out she isn't dead?" He turned. He looked at Aldemore, at Siegel, at Briggs, who had been in the water with her, who had seen her eyes open in the middle of the freezing ocean with that particular terrible clarity. "Probably," Thorne said, "less time than we would like." He opened the door. The corridor was quiet. Institutional lighting. The ordinary sounds of a working medical facility. Nothing out of place. Nothing to indicate that anything had changed. Thorne walked through it and understood with the instinct that 19 years of work had built into him at a level below conscious thought that ordinary was ending. He reached her room. He pushed the door open. She was sitting up. The rifle was still against the wall. She looked at him as he entered, then at Pruitt behind him with the laptop, then back at Thorne. And whatever she read in his face made something shift in her expression, the particular shift of a person who has been waiting for the people around them to catch up and has just watched it happen. 4,112 meters, Thorne said. Not a question. Yes, she said. Harlan? Yes. They tried to kill you after. Within 4 hours of confirmation, they always knew where the vessel was. A pause. I expected it. Thorne felt something move through the room. He couldn't name it precisely. It lived somewhere between respect and alarm, and it had sharp edges. You expected it, he said. I planned for it. She looked at the rifle. The rifle is rated to float at the density of the composite stock. The section of hull I was on, I positioned myself on it before the detonation, not after. She looked back at him. I had approximately 14 seconds between understanding that the charge had been activated and the moment of detonation. That was enough. Pruitt made a sound, not quite a word, the sound a person makes when a mathematical truth arrives faster than they were prepared for. 14 seconds, he said. It was sufficient, she said. Then to Thorne, you found the second partition. Pruitt found it. He can't open it. She looked at Pruitt directly for the first time, the same brief evaluation, complete in under 2 seconds. You're good, she said. Most people wouldn't find the seam between the layers. It took me a while, Pruitt said. And then because Pruitt was constitutionally honest, I'm still not entirely certain I understand how you structured it. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, a recognition. I'll open it, she said, but not yet. She looked at Thorne. First, I need you to understand something. The outer partition is the mission record. 17 operations. Documentation of what they tasked me to do. She paused. The inner partition is what I found while I was doing it. What did you find? Thorne asked. She looked at him steadily. Everything, she said. I found everything. The words sat in the room and expanded into all the space available. Thorne looked at Mara Voss, a woman who had been left to die in the North Atlantic 3 days ago by people who believed they had thought of everything and understood with a clarity that felt almost physical that she had thought of considerably more. We need to move fast, he said. Yes, she said. We do. The question Thorne needed to ask was not the obvious one. The obvious one was about the rifle, about the distance, about the specific mathematical impossibility of what Pruitt had just confirmed in that maintenance room. The question he actually needed to ask was the one that explained all of it. He pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down, not across from her, at an angle, the way you sit when you want the conversation to be a conversation and not an interrogation. She noticed. He had already learned that she noticed everything. Start from the beginning, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Something moved across her face, not resistance, but the particular difficulty of a person who has held a truth alone for so long that the act of releasing it feels like a physical event, like setting down a weight you've carried until you forgot it was separate from you. Then she started talking. She grew up in the foster care system. That part she gave him in one flat sentence without inflection because she had spent a long time learning not to assign emotional weight to facts that could not be changed. Rural West Virginia. A sequence of placements that the system would have described as adequate and that she would have described, if she were being generous, as survivable. What mattered was what came after. She was 15 when a woman came to the group home. She introduced herself only as Aldrich. No first name offered, no agency affiliation provided. She administered a mathematics assessment that Mara recognized immediately as different from any standardized test she had taken before, not because it was harder, but because it was looking for something specific. It was designed to find a particular kind of mind, the kind that processed spatial relationships and probability distributions and fluid variable calculations not as academic exercises but as a natural language. the kind that could look at a problem with 17 moving parts and feel intuitively where the solution lived before working out the formal proof. Mara had always thought the way she thought was a liability, something to hide, something that made teachers uncomfortable and other kids suspicious. Aldrich looked at her test results and did not look uncomfortable. 3 weeks later, Mara was in a private facility in Vermont, described to her as an advanced educational program for gifted youth in the foster care system. The other students were like her, mathematically exceptional, intellectually capable in ways the standard system had never known what to do with, and completely alone in the world in the specific way that children become alone when no one has chosen them. For 2 years, it was genuinely what it claimed to be: mathematics at the graduate level, physics, computer science, applied mechanics. She was exceptional at all of it. She was particularly exceptional at the applied physics components, trajectory modeling, fluid dynamics, the mathematics of objects moving through variable atmospheric conditions. In the 3rd year, the curriculum changed. They introduced the physical component gradually. Fitness training first, then coordination and fine motor skill development, then one afternoon a range. Paper targets at standard distances, framed as an applied physics exercise. She was very good at it, and they noticed. The other students were reassigned to different tracks. Mara was given specialized training. One-on-one, a man named Decker, Colonel Reed Decker, former military, though he never specified which branch or unit, and she learned not to ask. He taught her everything about long-range precision work, not just the mechanics, the mathematics, the atmospheric modeling, the real-time calculation under variable conditions that separated a competent shooter from something considerably more rare. And he was honest with her about one thing, which was the thing that made her trust him. He told her what she was being prepared to do. He told her she would be asked to eliminate people who caused serious harm to people who could not protect themselves, who operated in spaces where conventional law enforcement could not reach them. He told her this plainly, without euphemism, and looked at her while he said it as though her response to the information mattered. She was 17 years old. She had spent her entire life in a system that had processed her like paperwork. And here was a man looking at her as though what she thought about something was a relevant factor in what happened next. "You believed him," Thorne said. "Not a judgment." "I was 17, she said, "and I had never once been treated as though my judgment was worth consulting." She paused. "Yes, I believed him." She was operational by 21. The first 12 missions were as far as she could verify through the intelligence access she was given and the independent research she conducted after each operation exactly what she had been told. Arms traffickers, financial intermediaries for organizations that killed civilians, people who operated in jurisdictions where prosecution was a legal impossibility. She checked after every operation. She tracked news reporting and cross-referenced intelligence summaries. The targets checked out. Then came the 13th. The mission package identified the target as Elaine Sorby, 44 years old, forensic accountant, Boston. The intelligence summary described her as a financial intermediary, operating between several criminal networks facilitating money flows that funded 3 separate ongoing operations in Central America. The photographs showed her at meetings with known figures. Mara ran her standard pre-mission verification. 4 days of research within the parameters of access she had been given. What she found was that Elaine Sorby had spent 8 years as a forensic accountant for a nonprofit financial transparency organization headquartered in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The photographs of her at meetings with known figures were real. She had attended those meetings as an investigator. She had been building a documented case against the financial networks connected to a specific cluster of private defense contractors, whose names appeared with increasing frequency in the research files Mara had accumulated across 4 years of operational briefings. Elaine Sorby had 2 sons, 8 and 5 years old. Mara filed a target verification failure report. Mission protocol was clear. If pre-mission intelligence could not be independently confirmed, the operation was suspended pending review by the issuing authority. The issuing authority overrode the filing within 6 hours. They told her she was misreading the evidence, that her access level did not give her the full picture, that the meetings she had identified as investigative in nature were in fact part of the criminal network's own counter-surveillance infrastructure, and that the transparency organization was a cover. Then Decker came to see her in person. He had never done that before. In 4 years of operational contact, everything had come through established communication protocols. His appearing in person at the safe house she was using outside Richmond, Virginia, told her everything she needed to know about how seriously they were taking her refusal before he said a single word. He sat down across from her. He looked at her with the expression she recognized from the early years in Vermont, the expression that said her response to what he was about to say mattered. "You were chosen for this work because of your capability," he said, "not your judgment. Trust the mission." She had heard those words before in different forms. Every institution she had ever passed through had its own version of that sentence. She refused the mission, formally, in writing. She submitted the refusal through every official channel available to her. Then she ran. She had been preparing for it for 2 years. Not consciously, not with a specific plan, but some part of her, some precise and honest part, that had been running calculations in the background since the 3rd year in Vermont when the curriculum changed, had understood that the preparation was necessary. She had accumulated cash in small increments across multiple locations, documents, safe houses in 4 states. She had done this the way she did everything methodically, without drama, without telling herself what she was actually doing until the moment she needed to do it. 3 years of running. She moved constantly. She used everything she had learned about operational security and threat assessment to stay ahead of the people who were looking for her, and she had no doubt they were looking. She read pursuit patterns the way other people read weather. She understood how an organized search contracts and expands where the gaps appear, how to use the gaps without making them visible. And she collected every communication intercept she could reach through the back-channel access tools she had maintained before her disappearance. Every financial record she could pull through the access points that had not yet been closed when she left. Every name, every transaction, every contract number that connected the network to its operations. She built the inner partition piece by piece, encrypting each layer with a method she had developed herself, drawing on the mathematics of information security she had been studying since she was 15 years old in Vermont. "Harlan," Thorne said. "Tell me about Harlan." "Victor Harlan controlled the contracting side of the network," she said. "The public face, the legitimate business structure that provided cover for the financial flows. His contracts with government agencies created the budget lines that funded operations. The money moved through 11 layers of corporate structure before it reached anything that looked like what it actually was." She paused. "But more than the money, Harlan controlled the documentation. Every operation the network conducted had a paper trail that ran through at least one of his subsidiaries, which meant that proving the connection between those subsidiaries and the operations proved the entire structure. And you could prove it. I could prove it. Everything required is in the inner partition." She looked at her hands briefly. "I needed Harlan removed from the system before I could move the evidence forward, because as long as he was operational, he had the resources to suppress any investigation within days of it beginning. He had done it before." "Elaine Sorby," Thorne said. Something moved through Mara's face, a controlled tightening. "Her case file is in the inner partition. Her investigation was suppressed through 3 separate government channels within 72 hours of her first official submission. All 3 channels have documented connections to Harlan's contracting network." She paused. "She is still alive. I confirmed that before I took the shot. Her investigation was killed. She was not." Thorne absorbed this. "You confirmed it before. I needed to know she was safe, that her sons were safe, that the investigation being suppressed hadn't placed her in direct danger from other elements of the network." She paused. "It hadn't. They considered her neutralized by bureaucratic means. They did not consider her worth a more direct response." She said it in the flat, precise voice she used for operational information, but he heard what was underneath it. "Why the shot?" Thorne said. "Why now, specifically?" "Because I finally had everything I needed. The inner partition was complete. The documentation was sufficient to survive any legal challenge the network could mount. And Harlan was moving." She looked at him steadily. He had received information that someone inside a financial research organization in Boston was quietly reconstructing the original work that Sorby had begun. He was 3 weeks from activating a suppression operation that would have gone considerably further than bureaucratic channels. She paused. "I had a window. I used it. The room held that." Thorne was quiet for a moment. He was thinking about what 3 years of running looked like from the inside, about what it cost, about what kind of person continued to collect evidence against an organization that was actively hunting them, continued to build a case with methodical patience while living out of prepared caches in 4 states, continued to operate with that level of discipline, without a support structure, without anyone who knew what they were doing or why. He was about to speak when Pruitt's voice came through the radio he had clipped to his jacket. "Commander, we have a problem." The words were controlled. Pruitt was always controlled, but something in the register underneath the words was not. Thorne raised the radio. "Talk to me." "There is a monitoring thread embedded in the base network. Passive surveillance, non-intrusive. It has been active for an extended period. I don't know exactly what it has collected, but it has been running long enough to have pulled biometric intake data, medical queries, and identity access logs." 2 seconds. "They know she's here," Thorne said. "If the thread is reporting in real time, yes. If it is on a delayed transmission cycle, we have a window. I cannot determine which without tracing the output node, and tracing it will alert whoever is monitoring that we have found it." "Do not trace it," Thorne said immediately. "Leave it exactly where it is." A pause. "Sir, if we leave it, if we touch it, they know we know. Right now we have whatever time they need to mobilize and move. The moment we touch that thread, we lose even that." He was already moving toward the door. "How long, in your best estimate, before a professional team could reach this facility if they were staged at readiness?" Pruitt was quiet for 3 seconds. 6 hours minimum, more likely 8 to 12 depending on staging location." Thorne checked his watch. It was 11:47 in the morning. "Then we have until tonight, possibly longer. Keep working on the inner partition." He looked at Mara. "I need what's inside that module before anyone arrives." He lowered the radio. Mara had read his face before he finished the last sentence. "They found the monitoring thread," she said. "Yes." "How did you know there was one?" "Because there is always one." She said it with the particular flatness of a statement that has long since stopped being surprising. "At every facility in this region. It is part of the network maintenance package supplied by a contractor called Meridian Network Solutions. The contract was established 11 years ago." She paused. "Meridian is a subsidiary of a holding company that Harlan controlled." The temperature in the room did not actually change. It felt like it did. "You're telling me," Thorne said carefully, "that the surveillance infrastructure monitoring this facility was built and is maintained by the same network that just tried to kill you?" "Yes. And you knew this before we brought you in." "I suspected it. I could not confirm the specific facility without access to the contract records which are in the inner partition." She met his eyes. "I'm sorry. I needed to know I could trust you before I gave you information that would change how you made decisions." Thorne felt something move through him that was not quite anger and not quite admiration, and was uncomfortable precisely because it refused to settle into either. He pulled the chair close and sat down. He needed this conversation to be a conversation. "Mara," he said, "I need all of it right now. Not because I'm ordering you, because if there are people coming to this facility and I don't understand what I'm defending against, I cannot protect you. I cannot protect my team, and I cannot protect whatever is in that module. So I need everything, starting from the beginning." She looked at him for a moment. Then she told him about Decker. Colonel Reed Decker had found her in Raleigh, North Carolina 2 years ago. She had been in the city for 3 days and was already preparing to move. He appeared at the door of the apartment she was using. She had a weapon on him within 4 seconds of understanding who was at the door. He sat down without being asked. He did not try to prevent the weapon. He placed a USB drive on the table between them and said, "This is what I should have given you before you left." He had been collecting for 9 years. Since before Mara came into the program, he had known from the beginning what the network was. He had stayed because he believed for a long time that the targets were worth the compromise, that the people being removed were genuinely dangerous, and that the collateral damage of the method was acceptable given the outcomes. Then there was a target that wasn't worth the compromise. He couldn't sanction it. He couldn't stop it. And he couldn't leave without abandoning the people he was still in a position to protect from the worst of what the network was capable of. So he stayed. And he collected. But he needed something the collection alone could not provide. He needed a documented refusal inside the network's own system. A formal record created within their own protocols that proved the network had knowingly ordered the killing of an innocent civilian investigator and had overridden the objections of its own operational asset when those objections were raised. Without that record, the evidence in his drive was powerful but deniable. With it, the chain of culpability was complete. He flagged Elaine Sorby's file to Mara, knowing exactly what she would do with it. "He used you," Thorne said, not an accusation, a fact that required acknowledgement. "Yes," she said. "He used me." She paused. "And I am still deciding how I feel about that. I expect I will be deciding for some time." Another pause. "But what he gave me is real. 22 years of documented operations. The true origin of the network. The names of the people who built it, who funded its first decade, who established the contracting infrastructure that Harlan later ran. The inner partition gave us enough to break the current network," Thorne said. "The Decker material gives us enough to understand how it was built. And why. And who decided more than 2 decades ago that this was worth building?" She looked at him. "That material needs to reach your prosecutor, Frank Morrow." "Callum Vest," Thorne said. "That's the name." She looked at him steadily. "The inner partition needs to go to Vest, all of it, through a pathway that bypasses the facility's standard communication infrastructure completely, something the Meridian thread is not positioned to intercept." "Pruitt can build it," Thorne said. "The facility has an emergency satellite uplink installed before the Meridian contract was established. It's not part of the network architecture the thread maps." "How long?" "I'll ask him." Thorne stood. He moved toward the door. Then he stopped. He turned back. "Are any of the people who ran the operational side of this network Decker Aldrich? The people who issued the mission authority, are any of them inside this facility's command structure?" The question sat in the room. Mara looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know," she said. "That's the honest answer. I know names. I know designations. But the network's penetration into military and federal structures is one of the things I have not been able to fully document." She paused. "Which is why I told you not to report up the chain." "And why I didn't," Thorne said. They looked at each other across the room. A naval commander who had made an instinctive call on a rescue helicopter, and a woman who had spent 3 years preparing for a moment that required exactly that kind of instinct. The understanding between them settled into place the way the last component of a precision mechanism settles quietly, completely, without ceremony. Outside, somewhere in the facility's communication systems, the Meridian thread was pulling its quiet, steady stream of metadata. And in the main corridor of Portsmouth Naval Medical, 40 feet from the door of the room where Mara Voss was sitting, a man Thorne did not recognize was walking toward him with a clipboard, and the unhurried stride of someone who had every reason in the world to be exactly where he was. Thorne looked at him the way he looked at everything in a situation that had gone to a certain level of alert, which was to say, completely, and without appearing to look at all. The facility issued ID badges worn on the left chest. Standard positioning. He had noted every badge on every person in every corridor he had walked since he arrived. This man's badge was on the right. It was a small thing. Thorne stepped back into Mara's room and closed the door quietly behind him. "We're moving," he said. "Not in 5 minutes. Now!" Mara was already reaching for the rifle. She had read his face before he finished the sentence. They moved without running. Running was information. Running told anyone watching that something had changed, that a threshold had been crossed, that the people doing the running understood something. The people watching them did not yet know they understood. Thorne had learned this early and had never unlearned it. He walked at the pace of a man who had somewhere specific to be and knew exactly where that was, which happened to be true. Mara moved beside him with the rifle slung across her back in a carry configuration that told him everything he needed to know about how many times she had done this before. Not the panicked grab of someone in crisis, the practiced efficient movement of someone for whom relocating under threat was a trained reflex as automatic as breathing. She did not ask where they were going. He appreciated that more than he could have put into words. He keyed his radio on the team channel. 1 click, 2, 1. The pattern meant consolidate on my position. No verbal communication, nothing that could be overheard or logged. The man with the badge on the wrong side was still 40 feet behind them, when Thorne turned Mara down a side corridor toward the facility's secondary mechanical wing. He did not look back. Looking back was a signal. He kept his pace steady and counted footsteps and listened to the corridor behind them. The footsteps did not accelerate. Good. Not yet confirmed. Still operating on schedule. He had perhaps 8 minutes before that changed. Briggs materialized at the junction of the mechanical corridor with the particular quality of a man who had been standing there his whole career. He read Thorne's posture in under a second and fell in beside them without a word. The three of them moved together into the secondary wing where the facility's heating and electrical infrastructure ran in a constant low mechanical hum that swallowed small sounds and made ambient surveillance considerably more difficult. Pruitt was already there. Aldenmore behind him. Siegel came through a separate access door 40 seconds later, slightly faster than his usual pace, which for Siegel communicated urgency more clearly than most people's sprint. "Close it," Thorne said. Siegel closed the door. "We have company inside the facility, one confirmed badge on the wrong side right chest instead of left. There may be others with legitimate credentials. I do not know how deep the access goes." He looked at each of his people in sequence. "We are not alerting facility command. We are going to operate on the assumption that at least one person in this building's command structure is compromised until we know otherwise. We run on our own judgment until this is resolved." Segal said, "Rules of engagement. Protect the asset and the module. Minimum force. Nobody acts unless there is a direct and immediate physical threat." He paused. "These are professionals. They will not want a confrontation that generates witnesses and documentation. They will try to create an isolated situation. We don't give them one." Aldenmore looked at Mara. He was trying not to be obvious about it and not entirely succeeding. She answered before Thorne could. "Evidence sufficient to dismantle a shadow network that has been running covert operations under government contract cover for over a decade. Financial records, operational logs, names and documented connections to 17 confirmed kills across 4 years and additional operations going back 22 years before my involvement." She met Aldenmore's eyes. "If this module does not reach a federal prosecutor in the next several hours, every person connected to those operations walks free. Permanently. The network closes the gaps, burns the trails, and rebuilds under new structures." She paused. "That is what you're protecting." Aldenmore looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Thorne. "I'm in," he said, as though there had been any question. "Pruitt," Thorne said, "the transmission pathway to Vest." "I can build it," Pruitt said. He had already been thinking about it. "Emergency satellite uplink in the Northwest Equipment Room, installed 6 years before the Meridian contract was signed. It's not part of the network architecture the monitoring thread maps. I route through that, configure a custom encryption protocol, and the thread sees standard maintenance telemetry." He paused. "I need 40 minutes. "You have 25, Thorne said. Pruitt looked at him. "Commander." 25, Thorne said, not unkindly. "Precisely. Start now." Pruitt started now. Thorne turned to Mara. "The inner partition. You open it the moment Pruitt has the pathway confirmed, not before." He held her gaze. "Is there anything in that partition that changes what I need to know about the people coming tonight?" She thought for exactly 3 seconds. "Yes," she said. "One thing." She shifted the rifle on her shoulder. "The recovery team the network uses for asset elimination. I have only seen them referenced internally by a single designator. Vantage." She paused. "I have never identified individual members, but their operational signature is consistent across 7 recovery operations I have documented. They move in cells of 4, always one inside contact performing pre-operational reconnaissance before the cell commits. The man with the badge was almost certainly the inside contact." She looked at him. "Their mandate is not capture. It is termination and retrieval of materials. They are coming to confirm I am dead and to recover the module." Briggs said termination and retrieval. He said it the way you repeat something when you want to be absolutely certain you have heard it correctly. "They are not coming to arrest me," Mara said. "They are coming because a living asset with an intact module is considerably worse for them than a dead one. The man in the corridor was mapping positions and confirming my location. Within the next hour they will know where I am and how many of you there are." "Then we change where you are," Thorne said immediately. He looked at Siegel. Storage room northeast corner of this wing, one entry point, external walls on two sides. It was added during a renovation that predates the current facility management structure and does not appear on any floor plan I have seen. Siegel nodded. I know it. Move her there. Stay with her. He looked at Briggs. You're with them. He looked at Aldenmore. You and I are going to walk the main corridors for the next 20 minutes and give whoever is doing reconnaissance something to track. Let them see us moving normally. Give Pruitt time to finish. Aldenmore understood immediately. He was already adjusting his posture to something less alert. Thorne looked at Pruitt. The moment the pathway is live, you find me. I don't care where I am. Pruitt raised one hand briefly in acknowledgement and did not look up from the laptop. Thorne looked at Mara one more time before Siegel moved her. You've been carrying this alone for 3 years, he said quietly. She met his eyes. You're not carrying it alone anymore, he said. Something moved in her face. The same deep, complex movement he had seen in the medical room when he told her he had already given the order she was about to ask for. The movement of a person encountering something they had stopped expecting to encounter. Go draw their eye, Commander, she said. Her voice was steady. He went. The next 23 minutes were the particular kind of tense that does not show on the outside. Thorne and Aldenmore moved through the main corridors at the unhurried pace of two colleagues with nowhere urgent to be. Thorne talked. He described a training exercise with the kind of comfortable detail that fills a conversation without requiring real attention. Aldenmore responded at appropriate intervals. They were performing normalcy with the precision of men who understood that the performance was itself the operational task. Thorne spotted two more. The first was a woman near the administrative section reviewing a wall-mounted informational display. Her credentials looked correct at distance. Her positioning was wrong. She had chosen a spot that gave her simultaneous sight lines to 3 corridor junctions. Nobody reads a wall display from that specific location unless they have mapped the angles first. The second was a man in medical staff clothing near the main entrance on a phone. His conversation looked casual. His weight sat forward on the balls of his feet in the way that bodies maintain readiness when the face is performing something else entirely. 4-person cell. 1 inside doing reconnaissance. 2 holding positions in the main facility. 1 outside managing approach routes and withdrawal logistics. They were watching, waiting for the cell leader to confirm position and team composition before committing. He had time. Not much, but some. His radio clicked. Once, twice, once. Pruitt. He looked at Aldenmore. Slow walk back, he said. Don't change pace. They turned at the next junction and took the long route toward the mechanical wing, and Thorne used every second of it to finish the picture in his mind. 4 trained professionals against his team of 5 plus Mara. The facility security staff were an unknown he could not rely on without risking the information going to exactly the wrong place. He was going to handle this with the people who already knew. He pushed back into the mechanical wing. Pruitt was standing with the laptop, carrying the expression of a man who has just finished something difficult under conditions that did not allow for the time it deserved. It's live, Pruitt said. Emergency uplink. Custom encryption routed through a relay I configured to look like standard scheduled maintenance telemetry. The Meridian thread is looking at it right now and seeing a routine system diagnostic. He paused. I need 10 minutes to verify the connection is stable at the receiving end before we transmit anything sensitive. Thorne gripped his shoulder once. Good work. 10 minutes, Thorne said. Where's Mara? Seagal appeared at the interior doorway. Northeast room. She's ready. Thorne walked through. The room was small and concrete, lit by a single overhead fixture that Siegel had switched to emergency mode, giving everything a flat, even quality that softened nothing and revealed everything. Briggs was near the door. Siegel moved back inside after Thorne entered. Mara was standing at a position near the rear wall. Not at the door. Not at the center of the room. A specific location that Thorne recognized after a moment as the one position that provided a sight line through the narrow gap of the door frame to the corridor outside, while keeping her body entirely behind solid concrete. She had mapped the room when she arrived. Of course she had. 3 inside, 1 outside minimum, Thorne said. Holding position, still in reconnaissance phase. They're waiting for a communication window, Mara said. Vantage doesn't commit until the cell leader confirms the target's exact position and the withdrawal route is confirmed clear. She looked at him. The inside contact has already reported back. They're planning the approach now. A pause. 40 minutes, maybe less. Pruitt needs 10 more minutes on the pathway. Then we have 30, she said. That's workable. Briggs looked at her with the careful attention of a man reassessing something he thought he had already understood. You've been on the other side of a Vantage operation, he said. Twice, she said. I survived both times because I understood their methodology better than they expected an asset to understand it. They are very good, but they are optimized for targets who don't know they're coming. She met his eyes steadily. Tonight, that advantage is inverted. Seagal said quietly, You're calm. It was not an accusation. It was the observation of a man who had seen many people in threatening situations and had developed a precise sense of what genuine calm looked like against the performance of it. Mara looked at him. I have been calculating the variables on a situation like this for 3 years, she said. The uncertainty is over. Whatever happens in the next few hours, I know the shape of it. She paused. Uncertainty is harder than danger, at least for me. Siegel nodded slowly. He looked like a man who understood that answer more than he expected to. Pruitt's voice came through the radio. Pathway is stable. Confirmed at the receiving end. Ready when you are. Thorne looked at Mara. Open it. She crossed to where Pruitt stood with the laptop. She reached into the rifle stock a specific pressure point on the composite base that required knowing precisely where to apply pressure, a detail that would have taken Pruitt another several hours to locate independently, and a small panel released with a sound like a single quiet breath. She removed the data module. She sat down on the floor with the laptop and worked in complete silence for 4 minutes. The room watched her. She worked with the focused, even attention of someone doing something their hands know entirely something rehearsed until it became reflex. Thorne watched her fingers on the keyboard and thought about a 15-year-old girl in rural West Virginia whose mind worked in a way that a woman named Aldrich had identified and immediately begun calculating how to use. He thought about what it cost to be found by people like that. He thought about what it produced in a person with enough discipline and enough principle when the thing that was supposed to break them became instead the instrument of their undoing. It's open, she said. She turned the laptop to face him. He looked at the screen. Column after column of financial data, contract numbers, communication records, names he recognized and names that were unfamiliar, and names that he recognized the way you recognize a shape in the dark, not clearly but with the certainty that clarity when it arrived was going to be deeply uncomfortable. Pruitt, he said. Pruitt leaned over the screen. He straightened. He looked at Thorne. He looked at the screen again. Commander, I count 19 government contract designations in this first column. 3 of them are... He stopped. He pointed at the screen. 3 of them are active, currently funded, currently operational. The room went very still. This network isn't historical, Pruitt said. It's running right now. Mara said, that's why the timing mattered. Harlan was the authorization point for 2 of those 3 contracts. Without his signature, the funding flows freeze within 72 hours, and the operational structures dependent on them go dark. She paused. The 3rd contract runs through a separate authorization chain. She reached over and scrolled. She stopped. Thorne read the name on the screen. His hand resting on the edge of the laptop stopped moving entirely. He looked at Pruitt. Pruitt had gone the specific color of a man who has just connected a set of points he genuinely did not want to connect. Start the transmission, Thorne said. His voice was very quiet and very level. Everything, all of it. To Vest, now. 12 to 15 minutes for the full partition, Pruitt said. He was already moving. Start 12 minutes ago, Thorne said. Pruitt sat beside Mara and began the transmission process. Mara watched him work with the careful attention of someone who has trusted only themselves for 3 years and is learning in real time what it feels like to extend that trust outward. 8 minutes into the transmission, Briggs put his hand to his earpiece. He listened for 2 seconds. He looked at Thorne. Movement, main corridor junction. 2 individuals moving away from their holding positions. They're committing, Thorne said. 12 minutes, Pruitt said without looking up. I need 12 minutes. You have however long we can give you, Thorne said. He looked at Briggs, at Siegel, at Aldenmore, who had positioned himself near the door with a quality of readiness that looked indistinguishable from stillness to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. Nobody gets through that door until the transmission is complete, Thorne said. Nobody. Understood, Briggs said. Mara stood. She moved to her position near the rear wall, rifle properly held now, not slung. She had assessed the situation in the last 8 minutes and recalibrated. She moved to the specific location she had identified when she first entered the room, the one that gave her the sightline through the door frame gap while keeping her behind solid concrete. Thorne noticed she chose it without hesitation. She had filed it away the moment she walked in and had not needed to think about it since. They'll try the door first, she said quietly. If the lock holds, they move to contingency. Vantage protocol designates a distraction event in a separate part of the facility, something designed to divide the defending team's attention. She paused. Don't divide. We won't, Thorne said. The distraction is the approach, she said. Whatever you hear from another part of this building, the real movement comes from the direction of the sound. Every documented Vantage recovery operation follows this signature. Thorne looked at Aldenmore. Aldenmore had already understood. 7 minutes remaining. The door handle moved, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the kind of movement that a person not paying close attention would attribute to air pressure changes to the building's own mechanical rhythms. A fraction of an inch. No more. The lock held. Silence. Then from somewhere in the distant section of the facility, a sound. Something falling. Something breaking. The kind of sound the human nervous system is built to orient toward automatically, instinctively, without asking permission first. Nobody in the room moved toward it. Mara watched the door. 4 minutes remaining. 3, 2. Commander. Pruitt's voice was controlled and careful in carrying something significant underneath both qualities. Transmission is complete. Vest has confirmed receipt. He looked up. It's done. Thorne let out one breath. Then he was moving. All positions, he said on the team channel. Everyone moves now. Contain and hold. No unidentified personnel leave this building until we have verification on every face in it. What followed was not a firefight. Thorne would be precise about this distinction later in the documentation he would spend considerable time preparing because it mattered in ways that extended well beyond this single night. A firefight has a chaotic grammar. It produces casualties on multiple sides and records that are very difficult to manage cleanly. What his team conducted was a containment, and the critical difference was that they knew the building knew the positions and carried the decisive advantage of people who have already accomplished what they came to do and are no longer racing against a clock. The first Vantage operator was intercepted in the eastern corridor by Briggs and Siegel working together. He was fast and technically skilled, and in different circumstances would have been genuinely dangerous. Against Briggs and Siegel in coordination, he had approximately 5 seconds of effective resistance before the geometry of the situation resolved against him in ways he could not reverse. The second was found near the facility's communication room at a terminal, trying to transmit. Trying to report that the situation had changed before the people waiting for that report could discover it through other means. Aldenmore reached him before the connection completed. The third, the woman from the administrative section, simply walked away. She moved toward the facility's secondary exit at the calm, deliberate pace of someone who has assessed a situation and made a professional judgment. Thorne watched her go and did not move to stop her. He needed her to carry the message back. He needed the network to understand exactly what had happened in this building tonight. He needed them to know that the transmission had been completed and confirm that there was nothing left to retrieve because the truth was no longer inside these walls where any reach could touch it. The fourth, the one outside, was gone before anyone reached the perimeter. Mara had told him. The external position withdraws automatically the moment the interior operation fails. No communication required. The withdrawal is built into the cell structure from the beginning because the people who designed Vantage understood that a cell that waits to be told to withdraw is a cell that gets captured. At 4:19 in the morning, the secondary wing of Portsmouth Naval Medical was quiet. Thorne walked back to the northeast room. The door was open. Pruitt was at the laptop reading the same confirmation line with the expression of a man who keeps expecting the words to rearrange themselves into something less significant and finding that they don't. Seagal was against the wall. Briggs was in the corridor outside. Mara was standing exactly where she had been standing. The rifle was still in her hands. She had not fired a single round. She looked at Thorne when he came through the door. He looked at her. "It's done," he said. "The transmission went through. Vest has everything. The 2 inside contacts are detained. The cell withdrew." He paused. "It's done, Mara." She looked at the rifle in her hands. She looked at it the way you look at something that has been part of you long enough that you have to make a conscious decision to remember it is a separate object. The weight of it. The way it had been an extension of purpose for so long that setting it down required an act of deliberate will. "Is it enough?" she asked. Not the evidence. She knew the evidence was enough. He understood that without her having to explain it. She meant something without a precise operational name. Does it count? Does it reach far enough? Does it matter that it was done this way at this cost, across this distance over this many years? He thought about Elaine Sorby in Boston asleep, whose sons were asleep, who did not know that the woman who had refused to kill her was standing in a concrete room in New Hampshire at 4 a.m. He thought about 22 years of operations, about the people who had tried to report what they found and had disappeared into the spaces between official structures where records go to be buried. "It's enough," he said. She nodded once. Pruitt's radio crackled. A relay confirmation from Vest's secure line. He listened. He looked up. "Vest says the documentation is the largest single evidence package he has received in his career. He is requesting authorization to elevate to a joint task force with DOJ involvement." Pruitt paused. He was choosing his words. "He says the word he keeps using is historic." Thorne looked at Mara. She was looking at the rifle. He started to speak. She said, "There is a third partition." The room processed this the way a room processes a sound that doesn't fit its context, pure reception before meaning arrives. "We transmitted the second partition," Thorne said carefully. "Yes," she said. "The second partition contains everything I collected during 3 years of running. Financial records, communications, contract connections, the names of the people who sent me and directed operations and overrode my refusal." She paused. "The third partition is different. I did not build it." Thorne was very still. "Decker," he said. 22 years of documented operations, the true origin of the network, the names of the people who built it before Harlan ever ran it, who funded its first decade, who established the contracting infrastructure and then handed it to Harlan when they needed distance from it. Investigators who filed reports that never surfaced. Journalists whose deaths were ruled accidental. She met his eyes. "Decker spent 9 years collecting it. He gave it to me in Raleigh because he understood something that took me longer to understand." What did he understand? That the second partition gives Vest enough to break what exists right now, the current network, the active contracts, the names operating today. She paused. But the third partition gives him enough to understand how it was built. Who decided more than 2 decades ago that this was worth building and why? Without the third partition, the network gets dismantled and rebuilt under new names by people who were never identified. With it, she stopped. With it, there is nowhere left to stand. Thorne looked at her for a long moment. "The third partition needs to go to Vest," he said. "I transmitted it 11 minutes ago," she said, "while you were reading the confirmation from the second partition transmission." The room went very quiet. Not the silence of shock. The silence of a group of people simultaneously recalibrating their understanding of the conversation they had just been inside. Thorne looked at her steadily. "You could have told me first." "Yes," she said. She did not look away. "And if I had told you first, you would have wanted to verify the pathway security again. You would have wanted to review the content before transmission. Both of those things would have required time we did not have." She paused. "The third partition names the third authorization chain directly. The name on the screen that stopped your hand on the laptop. The moment that name passes through any system, the Meridian thread is monitoring the network knows exactly what we have. The transmission needed to happen before anyone in this building knew it existed." Another pause. "Including you." Thorne absorbed this. He thought about what it meant that this woman, in the hour following the most operationally intense night of the past 3 years of her life, had quietly made the calculation that ended the network's last viable option for containment, and had executed that calculation precisely without consultation, and was now explaining it to him not because she needed his approval, but because she considered him worth the explanation. He looked at Pruitt. Pruitt had the expression of a man who has just realized someone used his tools without asking and is working through the specific mathematics of whether to be offended. "She used your pathway," Thorne said. "I noticed," Pruitt said. Mara looked at Pruitt. "I'll apologize properly when this is over." "You don't have to," Pruitt said. He paused. It was the right call. It was the right... Coming from Pruitt, who was constitutionally incapable of saying something he didn't mean, this carried more weight than it would have from anyone else in the room. Mara received it the way she received most things, without display. But something registered. Thorne's radio crackled. Pruitt's line to Vest's office. Pruitt listened. His expression shifted in a way that Thorne had rarely seen on him, a loosening, as though something that had been held under pressure had found a controlled release. "Vest received the third partition," Pruitt said. "He says..." A pause. He was reading the message carefully. "He says the scope of the investigation has changed significantly. He is already contacting the Inspector General's office. He is requesting a joint task force with DOJ involvement effective immediately." Another pause. "He says he needs authorization to move on 3 names in the third partition within the next 6 hours before the network can activate contingency protocols." He looked up. "He says the word he keeps using is historic." Thorne looked at Mara. She was looking at the rifle again. He had come to understand across the past several hours that this was not attachment to the object itself. The rifle was the through line. The thing she had been found holding. The thing that had carried everything across 3 days of freezing water. Looking at it was a way of looking at the whole of it all. 20 years of it, from the group home in West Virginia to this room, from the moment Aldrich sat across from a 15-year-old girl and identified something she decided to exploit, to the moment that girl, 20 years later, used every capability she had been given to dismantle the people who gave it to her. "Tell Vest yes," Thorne said into the radio. "Whatever authorization he needs, he has it. Tell him..." He stopped. He thought about the right words, not the procedural ones, the ones that were actually true. "Tell him the woman who built it says to use all of it, every piece, hold nothing back." Pruitt was quiet for a moment. "Yes, sir," he said. The radio clicked off. Mara looked up from the rifle. For the first time since Briggs had pulled her from the water, her face was completely open. Not the evaluation, not the calculation running quietly behind everything else, not the controlled processing that had been the only expression available to a person who had been alone with an enormous truth for 3 years and could not afford to let it show. Just her face, whatever was underneath all of it. "What happens now?" she said. Her voice was quiet, not afraid, asking. "Now," Thorne said, "you talk to a great many people. You are not going to enjoy talking to investigators, prosecutors, intelligence oversight personnel who will ask you questions you have answered 100 times and will need you to answer again in formats and contexts and under conditions that are going to be genuinely frustrating." He paused. "And through all of it, you're going to have to trust a process that has not always deserved that trust." She was quiet for a moment. "And you," she said, "my team and I have our own set of uncomfortable conversations ahead of us about why we held evidence, isolated a survivor, and ran an unauthorized operation inside a naval medical facility without notifying the chain of command." He paused. "I expect those will be interesting meetings." "You followed your judgment," she said. "I did," he said. "I'd do it again." She looked at him steadily. "So would I," she said. "For the record." Seagal appeared at the door. His expression was the careful expression of someone carrying information they are not sure how to deliver. "Commander, there's a call coming through the secure terminal, routed through Vest's office." A pause. "They're saying it's the Deputy Attorney General." Thorne looked at Seagal. He looked at Mara. He looked at the rifle across her shoulder. He thought about a helicopter holding 40 feet above freezing water and a decision made before he understood why he was making it. He thought about Briggs going into the Atlantic and finding eyes that opened and evaluated before they fully focused. He thought about a number that silenced a room full of trained operators, and a name that stopped his hand on a table, and a woman who had transmitted a third partition 11 minutes before anyone knew the third partition existed. She had always been right about the math. "Tell them 10 minutes, Thorne said. He looked at Mara. "You should clean up first. You've been wearing the same clothes for 4 days, and you're about to speak to someone important." Something that had been building behind her eyes slowly, quietly across the past several hours broke through the surface. Not tears. Something older than tears. The particular release of a person who has carried an enormous weight alone for so long that the moment other hands reach for it, the body responds before the mind can organize a reaction. She laughed. It was short, genuine. The laugh of someone who did not know that sound was still available to them and was briefly genuinely surprised to find it there. It lasted 3 seconds. Then it was gone, and she was composed again, looking at him with an expression that would have been on a different face in a different life, considerably simpler to name. 10 minutes, she said. 10 minutes, he confirmed. She stood. She reached for the rifle, the automatic gesture of a hand that has moved to the same place 10,000 times. Then she stopped. She looked at it. She looked at Thorne. "Can you hold this?" she said, "while I clean up?" She held the rifle out. Thorne took it. He had held many weapons across 19 years of service. He had held them in training and in darkness and under conditions that required him to understand completely what a weapon was and what it cost to use one correctly. He had never held one that felt like this. It felt like testimony. It felt like 20 years of a person's life compressed into weight and metal and composite. Every calculation, every mission, every mile of 3 years of moving towards something that looked from the outside exactly like running away. The weight of a 15-year-old girl in West Virginia whose mind worked in a way that made her useful to people who measured usefulness in very specific terms. The weight of what that girl chose to become when she discovered that the terms were not the ones she had agreed to. 4,112 meters, 6.8 seconds, 1 round. But that had never been the whole story. The shot was the last calculation in a sequence that began the day Aldrich sat across from a girl and saw something worth exploiting and ran through every decision that followed, every mission accepted and every mission refused, every record quietly assembled in a waterproof compartment inside a composite stock rated to float held above freezing water for 72 hours by a person who had made one final calculation and found the answer acceptable. She was not finished. She had never been finished. Outside, through the walls of the facility, the first pale light of dawn was moving across the New Hampshire coast. In Washington, Callum Vest was at his desk, and his phone was ringing with a call from an Inspector General's investigator who had spent 3 years building toward a case he could never quite close, and who said when he heard what Vest had received in the past hour, "How solid is it?" "Airtight," Vest said. "Every document has a verification chain. The financial records cross-reference against public contract data. The communications have metadata that can be independently authenticated, all 3 partitions." He paused. "This isn't intelligence. It's evidence, court-ready, defense-proof. And the 3rd partition." He stopped. "The 3rd partition goes back further than anything I expected. 22 years. We're not just breaking the current network. We're closing the door on how it was built." A silence on the line. "Then we move in 6 hours. The investigator said. "Yes," Vest said. "We do." In Boston, Elaine Sorby was asleep. Her sons were asleep. The investigation that had been buried 8 years ago in the machinery of official channels was going to be retrieved before the day was out, and none of them knew it yet, and none of them knew the name of the woman who had looked at a mission package, found a forensic accountant, building a case against the people who had sent her and had chosen at a cost that had not finished being counted to refuse. Somewhere in a city that Mara did not know and had not been told, Colonel Reed Decker was watching the first news of the morning with the focused attention of a man waiting for a specific word. When the word appeared, he closed the screen. He sat for a long moment in a quiet room and thought about a 15-year-old girl in Vermont who had scored in a range he had never recorded before, and about what he had made of that, and about what she had made of it instead. He thought that his own moment was coming. He thought that when it came, it would matter. When Mara walked back into the room 7 minutes later, she looked at Thorne with the rifle still in his hands, and at Pruitt at the terminal, and at Briggs in the doorway, and at Siegel against the wall, and she said nothing for a moment because the moment did not require it. Then she straightened. She held out her hand for the rifle. Thorne gave it back. She slung it across her shoulder. She looked at the door. She looked at Thorne. "Ready," she said. And in that single word, in the voice of a woman who had been left to die in the North Atlantic and had come back carrying the storm, there was no performance, no relief presented for consumption, no drama of any kind, just the clean, absolute certainty of someone who has completed one calculation and is prepared without hesitation or ceremony to begin the next. She walked out. And the truth walked with her, not because it needed her protection anymore, but because she had earned across 20 years of precise and costly mathematics the right to be the one who carried it into the light.